Hello, this is the next section on Unit 3. This is Food Production 3.5. So we have been through previous to this photosynthesis, which is the way in which energy is brought into food webs, and the way in which, well, if it wasn't for photosynthesis, we wouldn't be here basically because it harvests light energy from the sun and turns it into a food source that we can use. And we then looked at food webs and we talked about how energy travels up, a percentage of it anyway, up food webs. This topic is looking at ways in which food production can be increased, and I suppose talking a little bit about threats to food production as well and environmental effects of our need to try and. So the first thing to do, this is a good video, I would um, have a look at this human population through time. So it just gives you an indication of what a drastic change there has been in the number of humans on the planet since the Industrial Revolution recently, basically the last couple of 100 years, and why there are stresses and various things, including getting enough food to people. So have a look at that. It lasts maybe 5-6 minutes. So you can, in the video, if you looked at it, I mean, we went sort of through thousands, hundreds of thousands of years where the human population was very low, and that period, the last kind of 150 years or so, it's just sort of taken off. And if you look at 100 years ago, there was 1 billion people in the world, and now we're up to about 8 billion. So that's a huge increase. So if we were in class, we'd be looking to I'd be asking to do a line graph for this. I don't know, you probably don't have graph paper kicking about your house, but that was the first task. The second one certainly you can do, so 2, 3, 4 and 5. So percentage increases, a prediction. The graph would help for 4, but hopefully you should be able to work it out. And then number 5. So press pause and do that, please. So the line graph, if you had drawn it, what you would have is what's being measured goes in the y-axis. So you'd have human population, billions, on your y-axis, going from 1 or 0 up to 8. And then on the x-axis, it would be the year 1920 to 1940. And you're going to have a line graph which looks like so, just showing an increase in the human population. For percentage increase, I hope you remember it's change over original times 100. So the change between 1920 and 2000 is 5. So the original was 1. So it's 5 over 1 times 100, which is 500%. This kind of throws people sometimes because they think, can you have a percentage increase over 100? And you can. I mean, if it's a 100% increase, it's doubling. If it's 500%, then you've got a 500% increase. So the next one, 3% increase between 1980 and 2000. So you're going from 4.5 to 6. So the change is 1.5. So 1.5 over 4.5 times 100 is 33%. To predict the population in 2040, well, with your graph, what you could do is just kind of get a ruler and sort of follow the line and work out where 2040 would come, but somewhere in the region of 9 to 11 billion, if it is to continue at the same rate. I suppose if you'd said it might level off a bit, or you had lower than that, as a result of, maybe there's countries where they're having fewer babies, or there's, like Japan and Korea, their death rate is now ahead of the birth rate, which means their population is stabilising. But yeah, the chances are it's going to be up to around about this level. The effects of that, you could talk about food shortages, overcrowding, more difficult to get fresh water to everybody. There's a few things you could talk about there. So here is our population growth again, and see if you can think about what the missing words here would be. So there's a population in billions going back 10,000 years ago to now. We've been looking at so many graphs recently in the news, haven't we? It just makes you think of first waves and second waves and things like that. But this is the population in billions of humans on planet Earth. So as the human population increases, the food yield, so this is a word you're going to use here, the yield from farming will need to increase to avoid starvation and malnutrition as well. So it's not just necessarily people are going to starve, they just can't get from the food available to them the nutrition that is required. So numbers of people are going up, which is going to be a challenge. Have a think about this. So John is a potato farmer. Here he is here. Hi John. He sells potatoes to supermarkets to earn a living. Recently, however, he has found that his yield has dropped substantially. The potatoes do not seem to be growing so much, and some are being eaten by an insect called the potato beetle. What can he do? So pause, have a wee think about that, and we'll see if you come up with what might happen in reality. So, potato not growing so much, things you can do there, you could maybe change the type of potato he's got. Something, I don't know if anybody will have come up with this from back in Unit 1, genetic engineering. Could it be genetically modified in some way? Genetic modification of food is common in America, not so common. I don't think it occurs in the EU or Britain at the moment, but that is one possibility. And if you genetically modify them, then that could potentially mean that they can grow in warmer conditions, or they could they could perhaps produce a toxin which isn't toxic to humans but could be toxic to potato beetles. So there's a few things you could do in terms of genetic modification. The other option is just to use an insecticide to get rid of the potato beetle, or you add something to the environment which eats the potato beetle. So we'll go through each of these possibilities. So not forgetting just to kind of hone in on the key points here. So what you need to be able to say is, or what you need to be able to do is explain how food yield can be increased. Second thing is describe how nitrates, this is an important term here, enter the food chain and how plants and animals make use of them. And then number 3, describe the negative effects of using fertilizers and also alternatives to fertilizer use. So what we have here, again, are the sort of two main options that we're considering. So first of all, this is fertilizer being put down on the land. So fertilizer can just be natural. It can be waste from cattle can be reused. And the second one here is a pesticide. So if the pest is eating your crops, you can potentially spray pesticide to it to get rid of the pest and increase your crop yield. So nitrogen, chemical element here, if you've done a bit of chemistry, you'll know that it's a diatomic element. It's the main gas in the air that we breathe. And the reason why it's important for us, for living things, is because it is used to a key component of what an enzyme is. Receptor, antibody, these are all kinds of proteins. So you need nitrogen to make protein. And obviously, enzymes completely key to everything that our body does, and we need nitrogen. Now the problem is with nitrogen, we breathe it in. You're breathing it in just now, but your body can't immediately turn that into the amino acids, which are used to make the protein, like enzymes. So we have to get it through our diet, basically. So this is the way it works. So what happens is you've got plants and they'll absorb nitrates. So the chemistry of this you don't really need to know. It's just nitrogen combined with oxygen is nitrate. And the nitrates are dissolved in soil water. And what happens is the plants take them up and they use them to make amino acids. And we know that a chain of amino acids produces a protein. Okay. Then what happens is you have got the nitrates turned into amino acids, which is then turned into protein, which is, the plant itself, I suppose, is going to contain protein. Then the animals come along, they eat the plant, consume the plant protein. They then digest it to amino acids. So the digestive system, remember from Unit 2, the amino acids are going to be absorbed into the capillaries. So protein is digested to amino acids, and then it's used to make animal protein. So it seems a bit strange, doesn't it? So it's kind of reversing what was done previously. So plant turns nitrates into amino acids and into protein. Animal comes along, eats the protein, then digests it to amino acids, and then makes it into its own animal protein. Okay, that's the way that this works. Now, how fertilizers are linked into this? What fertilizers do is they increase the nitrate content, and if you've ever seen a bag of fertilizer, they've got some. This is, you can't see it very well there because it's sideways. NPK is the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium ratio within fertilizer. So here it's 7, 10, 32. So depending on what you want to grow, you might have a different ratio there. But what fertilizers do is they increase that nitrate content, which then allows plants to grow. They can make more protein, and then as a result of that, you have got more food for humans. Okay, so try and think about fertilizers, try to think about it more than just they help plants grow. Try and link it into nitrates and think about amino acids and proteins. So that's good. Fertilizers help plants make protein. However, there are negative effects. So that doesn't look great, does it? So what we've got here is, you can see on this river and also around the city, I don't know where this is exactly, and also here's a satellite image which sees a lot of green, a green living thing around human settlement. So I wonder if you might know what this is. So this is the process which is resulting in the overproduction of that, or that organism is thriving, and that organism is algae. So the way that this works is, you get fertilizer and it runs off into fresh water. So try to imagine you've got a field which is having fertilizer applied to, it rains, and then the fertilizer runs off into water. As a result of that, you get what's called algal bloom. So those pictures that I showed you, you would call that algal bloom. So the algae grow, and the reason that they do that is because within the fertilizer they have nitrates. So there's a sequence of events which occur, and you need to be able to kind of go through this sequence of events. So first of all, once the nitrates get in there, you've got algal bloom. So think about it, you've got algae sitting on the top of the water. However, you've got underwater plants. Now, if the algae are sitting on the water, on top of the water, what's going to happen to the underwater plants? Well, they're not going to get as much light coming through. So you're going to have decreased light intensity. So as a result of that, the number of underwater plants is going to decrease because they can't carry out photosynthesis. Okay, so that's the first thing. And if your plants start to die, then we know, considering food webs, you're going to have a knock-on effect there. So the next consequence of that is you're going to have, well, it's going to be a proliferation of algae. So some of them will die. Also, these underwater plants will die. Now, another microorganism, which we talked about in Unit 1, is going to feed on the dead algae in plants, decomposers. So that would be bacteria. So bacteria, they start to multiply after feeding on the dead algae in plants. As the bacteria are multiplying, what they're doing is they're using up oxygen. So they're using up the oxygen, which is going to mean that the oxygen levels within the water is going to be reduced. As a result of that, there's going to be less available for other organisms, and this is going to mean that they are going to, or at least some of them are going to die off. So you're going to have a reduction in biodiversity. Okay, so this is our sequence of events if you have fertilizers, overuse of fertilizers, so the negative effect of fertilizers. So if we look here, I'm hoping when I record this as a video, this is going to work. Fingers crossed. So we have got fish in the water here, and here is a field with a crop in it beside it. So we've had fertilizer has been applied here. However, you've got heavy rain, and you can see you've got runoff, which is going into the water. Fish seem quite happy at the moment. Think about what's going to happen next, though. So you've got a kind of greenish tinge now in the water. So the nitrates, also phosphates in the water, they cause algae to grow. Algae block out the light, and you can see some of the underwater plants are beginning to die. Fish are still going at the moment. Then the next step, so the bacteria that decompose the dead plants, they start to reduce the amount of oxygen in the water, and there is your sort of cartoon depiction of death. So the fish's eyes got a cross in it. So they've died. They're upside down. They've died. This one's still hanging on. But because of the reduction in the amount of water, you have got death of organisms within that waterway. And there we go. It's not good now. So we've got a reduction in biodiversity. I'm stuck. It won't let me go into the next slide. Okay. Okay, so have a go at this. See if you can put these in the correct order. Press pause and do that. So what you should have is this. So fertilizers go into the water is the first one. Algae start to grow rapidly, blocking out the light. Then plants below surface of water die. Then you've got oxygen levels drop as microbes feed on dead plants. And finally, fish and vertebrates die from the lack of oxygen. So just to finish that off, I'd like to try and do this from memory. So draw 6 boxes on a piece of paper. 6 boxes probably. I've done it in 6 stages. If you can do it in less or more, that's okay. In the boxes, draw and describe what happens in the various stages of eutrophication, and then once complete, just check with your notes to make sure that it is correct. Okay. So this is what you should have. Sequence of events. Okay, so make sure you've got something matching this. The bit everybody kind of remembers the algal bloom causing the death of the plants, but this is the kind of detail required here is what's going on with the bacteria. So just make sure you get your bacteria in there and that they're using up oxygen. Okay, here's a past paper question to have a go at. So try this. Press pause and do this. So the first one, the chemical added to the soil by the gardener contains nitrates. Give the general name for this type of chemical. So that is a fertilizer. Describe the use that plants make of nitrates. So they use it to make amino acids, or you could use it to make proteins. And then 3, fertilizer added to farmlands can sometimes have an impact on biodiversity in ponds and rivers close by. Explain this effect. So explain this effect. So explain why there's an impact on biodiversity. What's the fertilizer doing to biodiversity in ponds and rivers? So the way to get your 3 marks here, first there's 4 things you can say. You only need to hit 3 of them though. So first of all, fertilizer ends up in the water, so that's a kind of simple thing you might have forgotten about. Then that causes algal bloom. Bacteria consume dead plants or algae, and then the oxygen level in the water decreases, and that is what has an impact on biodiversity. Okay, that is time for a break now, so go away and do something else. Okay, So revision from last time, that might have been a day or a couple of days ago. If you just did this 10 minutes ago, then there's not much point, is there? So the idea is, you want to make sure it's in your head. So hopefully you've left a break before you've come onto this bit. So press pause, put these letters in the correct order. This is our stages of eutrophication. So the effect of fertilizer running off into water. So you should have D first, so decreased, fertilizer runs off into fresh water. A, nitrates cause algal bloom. Then E, reduction in light intensity, so underwater plants die because they can't carry out photosynthesis. F, bacteria multiply after feeding on dead algae in plants. And finally, not quite finally, C, bacteria use up the oxygen. And then finally, B, biodiversity decreases. So the last part of this, we've already done this really, haven't we? Described the negative effects of using fertilizers, alternatives to fertilizer use. We haven't quite talked about that yet. And then the other part of this lesson is looking at the negative effects of pesticides and the alternatives to using pesticides. So any ideas? I think I talked about it, didn't I, in the previous session. So what you could do is genetically modify crops. So if you see the letters GM, that means genetically modified. And they are plants engineered to possess genes from other organisms which improve their characteristics. And essentially, if we're looking at if they're an alternative to fertilizers, then they're going to do something which allows the plant to grow more or resist disease, so, something which results in an increased food yield for humans. So just to give you some examples here, so what we've got is, this is maize or sweet corn, so it could be genetically modified so that it survives drought, so it can survive in lower water, when there's less water available than there is normally, and tomatoes with a longer shelf life as well. These are both examples of genetically modified crops which are available in the world, not in the UK, but they're out there and countries are making use of them. And here is a video to watch on YouTube, so have a look at that. What is a GM food? Okay, so moving on from fertilizers, the next part is pesticides. So pesticides, I've talked about this, so they're just sprayed onto crops and they're used to kill organisms. One of them is aphids or greenfly, and the reason why is because they eat the crops. If you eat the crops, they reduce the yield. Okay. So positive, if you're a farmer, you get more food. Positive if you for a consumer as well, that they can access the food. However, pesticides do have negative effects as well. So what we've got here is a food web, and you remember this is your pyramid of, it's not clear whether this is a pyramid of biomass or a pyramid of energy, but we've got our food web here. So you've got the algae, which is consumed by mayfly nymph, which is consumed by sunfish, and is consumed by great blue heron. And you can see the concentration of the pesticide here. So within the water, there's a ppm is parts per million. And what you can see actually is as you go up the food chain, the concentration of the pesticide is actually increasing, and it's increasing 10 million times. So the algae is getting much, less pesticide present within it than the heron does at the top of the food chain, and we'll explain why. So this process, first of all, in which it accumulates, so it builds up, it gathers within the bodies of animals over time. This is called bioaccumulation. And what happens is, because animals eat many organisms from the level below, the toxicity increases as you go up the food chain, and it can reach lethal levels. So a lot of these pesticides are non-biodegradable, so they can't naturally be broken down. It's a bit like, we talk a lot about plastics. are non-biodegradable. So, you know, somebody chucks a plastic bottle into a river, it's going to go out to sea, and you know, it's not going to go anywhere, which is depressing, but that's the way it is. Um, they're not a lot of plastics are the majority that are out there in the world will not be broken down naturally, and the same with some of these pesticides. So it means they build up within organisms as you go up the food chain. So ideally, you'd want to try and avoid pesticide use if possible. Particularly, if it's just your own garden and you're just growing flowers or whatever for your own benefit, it's you definitely want to try and look at alternatives, I think. So one of them is called biological control. So biological control is what you do is when a pest, something is used to kill it. So maybe you can work it out from, you'll know this word. So if you've got a problem with aphids, what you can do is introduce ladybirds because they are the predator of aphids. Okay, so that's biological control. You're controlling the pest population by adding in something which consumes it. And going back to this that we talked about before, so what you could have also is genetically modified crops which are pest resistant. And yeah, they could produce a chemical which is maybe toxic to insects, but is not present by the time it comes to being in the human food chain, or just isn't toxic to humans at all. So just to sort of summarise this topic, a big part of it is the stages of eutrophication, which you should learn. But in terms of just a sort of summary, this is worth doing. So press pause and spend maybe 10 minutes doing this. Okay, so for fertilizers, the advantage is it contains nitrates, which increase plant growth and ultimately crop yield for humans. The disadvantage is it can run off into water, causing algal bloom. We have all those various stages which occur involving bacteria and oxygen, but the end result is you have reduction in biodiversity. And then for fertilizers, the alternative is to develop genetically modified crops. So those that would have perhaps a longer shelf life, or maybe you could say they don't require as they're more efficient at turning nitrate into amino acids or something like that, something that just results in more growth. Then for pesticides, the advantage is that they kill insects which eat useful crops. So you increase crop yield again. Disadvantage is that they are toxic, and if you get the word bioaccumulation in here, that's good. So, and what bioaccumulation means is the concentration increases as you go up the food chain, so they accumulate in the bodies of organisms. And an alternative to pesticides is biological control. So that's when you introduce the predator of the pest, for example, ladybirds to eat aphids, or you develop genetically modified crops that are pest resistant. Just to finish off, we all love these. This is revision of various parts of Unit 3. So see if you can unscramble these and come up with a suitable National 5 level sentence, or as ever you can combine some of them. So press pause and do that. Okay, so number 1 is chlorophyll. So what you can say is chlorophyll is present in chloroplasts within plant cells, and it absorbs light energy for the process of photosynthesis. Sluggioc is glucose. So glucose is produced during photosynthesis, or you could say it's produced during the carbon fixation stage of photosynthesis. You could say that it's a carbohydrate. 3 is photosynthesis, so the process by which light energy, plants convert light energy into chemical energy, or turn it into glucose. ATP, so again you can talk about the role of ATP during photosynthesis. So light energy is converted into ATP, so it is the initial form of chemical energy. Charch is starch, so for this one you could say that when plants produce glucose during photosynthesis, they may turn it into starch as a storage carbohydrate, for example, potato tubers. Treat temperature. So temperature, you could say, is one of the limiting factors of photosynthesis. You could say temperature, photosynthesis is dependent upon temperature because enzymes are involved in the process and they have an optimum temperature. Voltmen is movement. So you can say that movement is one of the ways in which energy is lost between levels in a food chain or a food web. Einstar is nitrates. So nitrates are used by plants to produce amino acids, which they then are used to make protein. Or you could say nitrates are present in fertilizers to improve plant growth. Tide spice is pesticide. So pesticides are used to kill pests which feed on crops. You could also talk about the alternative to pesticides, which is biological control, or you could talk about bioaccumulation, which is a problem caused by pesticide use. And then finally, triphosphate is fertilizer, and we've just talked quite a lot about fertilizer, haven't we? So fertilizer can be used to increase or you can combine 8 and 10, can't you? So fertilizers contain nitrates which aid plant growth. Okay, and that is it. That is the second last topic of National 5 Biology.